Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Chitheads. I'm Jacob Kyle. My guest today is Ralph de la Rosa, who's a psychotherapist and meditation teacher based in Brooklyn, New York. He is the creator of the Mindfulness Sessions, which is a weekly meditation group that meets at Loom Yoga Studio in the Bushwick neighborhood of Brooklyn. Ralph and I spoke about a wide variety of topics in this interview, including neuroplasticity, some of the common myths about meditation, and also some problematic notions of enlightenment and what enlightenment means. Ralph also shared very openly his incredible life story, which from a very young age was characterized by a lot of suffering, loss, and depression. He speaks candidly about his battle with drugs and the various steps on his spiritual path, which finally culminated in the Buddhist-informed practice that he teaches and practices today. Towards the end of the interview, Ralph led us in a really beautiful short practice of what he calls brain rewiring, which helps to shift the neural pathways in positive and transformative ways. Before we get started, I do want to offer just a short disclaimer and apology for the quality of my microphone in this interview. I've had some trouble with this microphone, and it's been replaced now. But in this interview, there are moments where it is a little bit hard to hear me, so I apologize for that, and won't be happening in future interviews. All right, so without further ado, here's Ralph de la Rosa. Hello, Ralph. Thanks so much for joining us.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
So it's interesting that we're only now getting an opportunity to chat because I feel like we have a lot of mutual friends, and there's a lot of places and times that I've come into contact with the Mindfulness Sessions, which is your project, and also just seeing your name around, I've heard about you. And when you had offered some of your Dharma talks and some recordings of your workshops recently, and I listened to them, I was further struck by the fact that I hadn't really chatted to you because so much of what you said really resonates with me. I really appreciate your perspective on Buddhist meditation practice. I feel like what's interesting about you is that you really dispel a lot of the mythology and you address a lot of kind of the dogmas about meditation in a way that's really fruitful for a lot of people. And one of the things that you mentioned in one of the workshops I listened to was mindfulness practice from a brain perspective. So I'm interested to know, sort of just to start off, what does this mean? What is mindfulness practice from a brain perspective? And also in comparison to what mindfulness practice might be, from not a brain perspective.
Sure thing. So, first of all, thank you for all of those lovely words. That's really amazing, and I'm so pleased to hear that what I'm putting out into the world is resonating with people. I'm just sharing my practice, sharing what has been generously shared with me and what has been generously passed down generation after generation for millennia. And so it's just such an honor to have this, to serve as a vehicle for this body of information, this body of knowledge, and this body of technique, of inner technology, to be a vehicle for that and to share my practice with others has been actually, sometimes I talk about how it's like a shell game. It's a bait and switch. People think that they're coming to me to receive something, and actually I'm receiving all of the benefit because offering this really and truly pushes me to study, pushes me to practice in a really honest and sincere way, and I get so much benefit from offering it. I'm the one who's really walking away with something all the time. So in the spirit of that, thank you again for having me along to share some more in this interview. With regards to the brain-based situation with meditation, it's a really interesting question because there's no such thing really from a certain point of view as a not brain-based perspective. Right. So certainly, of course, we've seen over the last several years an explosion of interest about meditation. It seems like every time I'm opening the Huffington Post or the New York Times or even Business Insider or Forbes magazine, there's something about mindfulness. There's something about the way that it's being proven to shape the brain and have so much outstanding benefit in people's lives. And that is really wonderful. The brain-based perspective, really what it is giving us a new language, a new set of terminologies that are more accepted in the Western world to talk about the stuff that we've already known for a really long time. So it's really fascinating to me to think about you know, Buddhist monks and lay practitioners from centuries ago doing these exact same practices and maybe not even knowing what the brain was or that it existed in the way that we are aware of it. And still these practices were changing their brains without them knowing it, right? So in terms of the brain-based perspective specifically, you know, we know that where we place our awareness and the quality with which we place our awareness specifically leaves behind traces of neural structure. Everything, if I can back up a little bit, the brain-based perspective is really about neuroplasticity, about the insight that the brain is plastic, that it's constantly changing, and it's constantly changing with experience. Neuroplasticity is what they say is experience dependent. Therefore, everything that we think and everything that we take in through our senses and everything that we do with the mind is incredibly important because everything we do, again, leaves behind traces of neural structure. Physically is creating changes in our body, and our brain and our minds and our bodies are the vehicle for everything that we experience every moment of every day. So whereas meditation from a non-brain-based perspective could say, well, if you're a little bit harsh on yourself in the name of achieving concentration, that would be an acceptable thing. I would say that the brain-based perspective really heightens the need for radical kindness, for radical grace and positivity and self-compassion, and paying attention to the fact that every bit of how we treat ourselves in a meditation practice is incredibly important because it's changing us. It's changing us. So there's no room for harsh recrimination or for thoughts of self-judgment from a brain-based perspective, because we know that every iota of negative self-talk is what our mind is taking shape around. But really, truly, there's no difference because the brain and the mind are in constant relationship with one another. They're not the same thing, but they are in constant relationship with one another, and you can't have one without the other. And so there's really no difference between the two perspectives. I think kindness has been the bedrock of meditation and the meditation tradition from day one. So.
That's really interesting. And what you said about neuroplasticity, I wanted to maybe ask you about, because from my understanding, this perspective of neuroplasticity is actually a fairly recent shift in the understanding of the brain, if I'm correct, in that the brain was previously thought of as being relatively static. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering if you could maybe just talk a little bit about that. You know, what was this kind of shift in the idea of how the brain interacts with the body and how these practices can affect the brain?
Sure. So, you know, up until 20, 30 years ago, the predominant thinking in scientific culture was that you received all of your programming from years 0 to 5. Mm-hmm. You received all of your conditioning for your personality, your character, your habits, your various traits in the early ages of your life. And then that was it. The rest of your life was playing out that conditioning, playing out that programming. And if you were an alcoholic, well, you were stuck like that. If you were schizophrenic, then you were stuck like that. If you were a depressive, then you were stuck like that. If you were an obsessive compulsive or a binge eater, then that was your lot in life. Mm-hmm. And now we know that none of this is true. That none of this is true, that the brain changes. Certainly 0 through 5 are the most important years and the years when we are most vulnerable and susceptible to influence, sure. But the brain changes all the way up until the time that we die. So it places humanity in a much more hopeful situation than was previously conceived to be.
Yeah, I think it's so fascinating and such an important observation discovery because, and maybe you agree with me, I feel like this mythology that you're speaking about of kind of, coming into a certain static identity, it still prevails. I mean, that is really what a lot of people, maybe not in an explicit way, but implicitly they feel that, you know, they can't really change once they're an adult. Everything is basically settled, and so what I hear you saying is that there's this profound possibility for you know, a malleable identity that can really start to work in the direction of you know, more liberating ways of thinking and behaving, and potentially healthier ways of living.
Yes, and allow me to hold up a contrasting idea here too, because one thing about the promise of neuroplasticity, one thing about the promise of mindfulness definitely creating changes in the brain is that, well, it'd be really seductive to think that this means change is really easy, and that change, you know, we can achieve change in a relatively short amount of time, and that a few meditation sessions or a few retreats or a few therapy sessions or something like that is enough to achieve radical changes. Yes, there are studies being done where in 6 to 8 weeks with 20 minutes of practice a day, mindfulness practitioners are creating lasting changes in their brain that in post-tests, 6 months, a year later, are still there even after practice stops. Yes, that is happening. But we're also talking about practitioners who are sitting down every day for 6 to 8 weeks. And that can be actually a challenging situation out here in the non-scientific world where, you know, practitioners who are in the study, they're paid to practice, right, basically. And, you know, achieving that sort of discipline can be a little bit tough for beginning practitioners and can even be discouraging. You know, so yes, change is possible. And we are the creators of that change. We definitely have the opportunity to participate with our reality in such a way that we can sculpt our brains, we can train ourselves to relate to emotions in a much more skillful, healthy capacity, but it also takes time, and there's no substitute for the daily regimen and the constant work on oneself, and looking at how change is really made possible and fast-forwarded, galvanized by when we take a multifaceted approach. So yes, meditation, no substitute for meditation, but also what are you doing with your body? Right. You know, yoga practice, exercise, these things are really important. What are you doing with your breath? You know, do you have somebody to talk to that you can trust? Do you have a good social support system? What does your diet look like? Do you drink enough water? All of these things still remain crucially important alongside meditation practice.
Yeah, you can't just have, you know, principles in those 20 minutes of meditation every day. There has to be some kind of like integration with the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That as well.
Yeah. Wow, that's so interesting. So now I want to shift gears a little bit and go to the story of your practice. So I would love to just hear, you know, what brought you to Buddhism, you know, how you kind of evolved and what situations in your life led you to this path.
Sure. So a little bit of a long story, but, well, sometimes I start my story by saying, when I was very young, I wanted 3 things. I wanted to know the truth. I wanted to be Michael Jackson, and I also wanted to die. You know, I grew up not in a tremendously difficult situation, but with a fair amount of difficulty. My dad literally just disappeared from my family when I was 4 years old. I developed a fairly severe depression when I was 8 years old and began thinking of suicide on a daily basis at 8 years old. I was also really obsessed with rock and roll and Michael Jackson and Bruce Springsteen and Motley Crue. And I also grew up in a Southern Baptist family and community where in Southern California, in a small town near Arizona and Mexico called El Centro. So all of these kind of elements in my life of just having experiences of despair, of not fitting in. I didn't fit in with boys in public school because I wasn't aggressive and competitive and into bullying and trying to come out on top. which actually made me a target for harassment and bullying myself. And later that became, getting beaten up and jumped and things like this. So kind of hitting these real emotional lows early on in life gave me a real hunger and thirst for, well, what does this all mean? Is there something higher? What is behind the scenes of all of this? And is there somebody pulling the strings? And if so, I want to know that someone, right? And the only body of knowledge I had access to at that time was Christianity. So I dug in pretty deep at a very early age, at about 6, and then went even deeper at about 12.
At 6, you went deep into Christianity.
Yeah, at 6, I surprised my family by walking the aisle and going up and doing the prayer of accepting Jesus as my personal Lord and Savior and making a public profession of my faith in my church and getting baptized and everything. And everybody was like, "You're 6 years old. Do you even know what you're doing?" And I was like, "Yes, if this is it, if this is what's available, then why would I wait?"
You're looking for meaning.
Right. And then when I was 12, I met a youth minister who really, I didn't realize it at that time, was a surrogate father figure for me. And I went very deep into Christianity, into daily prayer, multiple prayer sessions per day, reading the Bible, attending church whenever the doors were open, that sort of thing. And really when I trace back now, a lot of my first very deep meditation experiences came from praying several times a day and kind of going within several times a day, and also this practice of confession of like, well, what have I done? Let's review my steps. I mean, yes, the guilt and the shame aspect that is embedded in Christianity, not so healthy, but there's a intelligence in doing that, let's review what's happened for me today, and think about how I can do better and think about how I can resolve this. And that led to a feeling of deep presence in me that I would name now very differently, not so much as a presence of God, but just a deep presence of the stillness of mind that is, underneath all the layers of chaos and insanity that we experience on an everyday basis is actually available also on an everyday basis. So eventually that situation led to a great disillusionment. I was verbally and on one occasion physically abused by my youth pastor. And let's see, so then I rebelled for quite a while and got into punk rock and DIY and Riot Girl and feminism and animal rights. And that was certainly another type of awakening that was very important and something that still informs my path today. I discovered Reiki when I was 18 years old, and I was told that it was the same type of healing that Jesus used. And I was very intrigued by that. And I was very intrigued by that is the same power that Jesus used to even raise Lazarus from the dead and to heal the blind and what have you. And so that's
big
that
promise.
Yeah, right for one weekend, weekend workshop for $120. And this is what you'll get. Right. And so, that's how it was sold to me. And I'll never forget, actually, the weekend that we went to do the workshop the first time, the person who was the Reiki master who was attuning us had to cancel because she got sick. And I thought, well, wait, what?
She can heal herself. What the heck is going on?
Exactly. My understanding of Reiki today is now very, very different. But at the time and through the eyes of an 18-year-old, there was a disillusionment on the way with that already from the beginning.
Setting it up for failure. There was no way I could live up to that.
Right. But then the person that I explored Reiki with was my first love, and that eventually led to heartbreak and some more disillusionment as well. Somewhere along the way, I was introduced to the book Be Here Now by Ram Dass, kind of seminal text written in the 1970s, one of the first authentic texts written by and for practitioners of the Dharma that really made a landing here in the West. And when I had my heart broken by my first love, I really wanted to drop out in a real way. And my disillusionment with the world was such that it was like, also with a history of depression and suicidality, that got woven into this attempt at spirituality, because it was like, well, if this is samsara, I want out. I want out in a radical way. And really that stab at spirituality was fueled by this sense of escapism. I want out of the material world. Please show me how. I never want to come back here again. If reincarnation is true, let's make sure this this mess, we don't have a rerun of it, right? Yeah. So it was that when I started hanging out with the local temple of Hare Krishnas, who definitely had a way out. Hey, join up the temple. You'll never work a day in your life. You'll never punch a time card again. This is definitely the way out of samsara. We are completely in rejection of the world. We dress differently. We keep a different schedule. We're up at 4 a.m, singing and dancing. And we are definitely with our eyes set on how to not reincarnate and take another birth here in samsara, and how to be reborn in a pure land of bliss. And to my, at that time, 19-year-old eyes, that looked like a really good thing. And again, just quite a promise to live up to. And so I went for it, and I dove in, head first, and moved into the ashram and took on in California. This was actually in Pacific Beach, San Diego, California. And had a wonderful time singing and dancing and feasting, and definitely learned how to cultivate transcendent states of true bliss. Wow. Singing and dancing in the temple all the time just really gave way to this feeling of ecstasy and divine devotion, and I'm really doing the highest thing that I could possibly do with this human birth. And what a validation that was, and how beautiful was it. But time came when I found out I was actually traveling on the road with a group of 8 other celibate monks called brahmacharis. We were selling Hare Krishna literature in the parking lots of Weezer and No Doubt shows. Wow. Because we were... Fertile minds. Yes, exactly. We were looking for, and they called them sweeties, which was anybody who looked lost. Yeah. We would see... A lot at a Weezer concert. Right. We would see a girl walking in Doc Martens with pink hair, who was about 16 years old, and this literally happened. Sweetie at 6 o'clock, turn the van around, I'm gonna sell her a book. And a monk would jump out and sell her a book. And so that's what we were doing at that point. I couldn't take it in the temple, so they sent me on tour. Selling literature, and I got around these hardcore celibate dudes, and it turned out that one of their favorite pastimes was talking bad about women, literally female bashing over lunch, because I don't know, it's kind of complicated, but celibate monks are in a very complicated situation with women in the temple who may be looking for a husband. Because women are told that their best chances for enlightenment is to find a really devout guy, and the really devout guys are all celibate. So there's this whole... This is in the ideology of... This is in the... Yeah. In the temple. Yeah. So, at least in the temple that I was in, but it's certainly in Srila Prabhupada's words and his interpretation of the Bhagavad Gita, and all of this stuff. And so... I was, again, really searching and really going for it, and then bumping up against disillusionment and having to... I was in Nashville, Tennessee when I left. I had no clothes, no hair, no money, no anything. I actually had to call my dad in Oklahoma to come and get me, which was another journey and another story for another day. So... And walking away from that was incredibly painful also. Mm-hmm. And it took me... I found out about Amma pretty much right after I left the temple, but I wasn't quite ready to re-engage with anything, not for a few years. In the year 2000, through, I don't want to take up all the time of this podcast, but through a string of just unlikely events, I ended up meeting Amma for the first time, and ended up in San Ramon, California. I had made it up to San Francisco at this point. I ended up meeting Amma for the first time and absolutely fell in love. And here was a path with little dichotomy, with little power hierarchy, with where I just didn't sense some of the distortions that I had experienced before. And I traveled across the country with her that year. I traveled not knowing how I was going to get from city to city and not knowing where I would lay my head on any given night. And I made it from San Francisco all the way to Rhode Island with no problem. Just as she told me. I asked her if I could go, and she said, "It will be no problem." And it was no problem. I just made it.
Were you traveling with a community of other people?
There's a community that definitely follows her on tour. So, there's people looking for rides, or people looking to, split renting a car, or people looking for people to share their hotel room with them or whatever. So it wasn't, insanely difficult, and I wasn't that crazy, and I certainly wasn't the only one doing it. But what a summer it was. What a summer it was, just absolutely immersing myself in practice, immersing myself in, if you've ever met Amma, she definitely has a presence. Oh, yeah. She definitely brings the love bomb, and you can just feel it all around her. And, lots of really amazing things happened that year. And I definitely met with transcendental, blissed out, Ananda, just ecstatic spiritual states and experiences on that trip, that when that summer ended and I found myself eventually back in San Francisco, back in my so-called worldly life, those experiences were no longer there, and there was no day-to-day follow-up. And how do I maintain a practice? What does it look like to engage on this level without the guru present? Yeah. Very difficult. And the problem was really me. The problem was that I was attached to experiences. I was attached to reaching transcendent states of meditation. Mm-hmm. And without Amma there, I couldn't really go there. And I really thought that was the point.
Right.
I really thought that was the point, was to reach these high states of consciousness, and to stay there. But, you reach these high states of consciousness and you invariably come down. And I didn't know what to do with that. And I returned to my depression. I returned to a sense of hopelessness. I returned to wanting to die, actually. And I returned to drugs, actually. And because there is a way to maintain a high state of consciousness. There is a way to just hold that, ability to modulate your emotions, modulate your experience. So it's, I felt like drugs were an empowerment, actually. I'm putting my life in my own hands, right? I call the shots here. I dictate what I want to feel, and when I come up and when I come down, and, whatever. Of course, that was a huge, incredible lie. And I eventually, and I was doing this alongside of spiritual practice, alongside of chanting my mantra, alongside of going to see Amma at the ashram twice a year, for many years. And I couldn't figure it out, and I couldn't get it together. And I was, practicing, but still lost and confused, and had a very, dualistic life. Yeah. So eventually that bottomed out on me. Eventually, cocaine and whiskey and fun party times turned to, when the floor fell out from underneath me, as in 3 people died. One of them was my dad. Another was a singer in a band that I played in called the River Bottom Nightmare. Died of a heroin overdose. My dad died of a heart attack, and a woman that I was partying with OD'd, and she was sleeping in a bed next to me, and I woke up and found her. So when tragedy struck in my life, my addiction went from, party times and dancing in clubs and playing in rock and roll bands to heroin and hiding out and just very severe depression and really trying to kill myself, but in a cowardly way, in a slow way, and but daily. I mean, heroin addiction is quite intense, and what you're trying to do when you're really addicted is you're trying to get right to the edge of ODing on a daily basis and without slipping over. And I definitely slipped over more than once as well. So that put me in a position of either I really get this together or I'm going to be successful one day. And I had to go to rehab. Earlier that year, before I went to rehab, I discovered Dharma punks. And in San Francisco, it's called Urban Dharma. And I sat with these teachers, Vinnie Ferraro and Jean Lushtak, who I considered to be my first Buddhist teachers, the first ones who gave me meditation instruction in the insight meditation tradition, and first laid Buddha Dharma on me. And luckily enough, I had discovered that, which is very much a recovery-oriented community. When I landed in rehab, they allowed me to go to Dharma punks for those reasons. And there my meditation practice started, in this place where, I went to this rehab where the dudes were being bussed in from San Quentin all the time, and unshackled on the premises, and then were my roommates. And then sleeping next to me. And it was that kind of environment, but it was amazing because it was 6 months of getting to be my broken self and not having to work and just sitting in a room and working it out in all of these group therapy sessions, and then having the opportunity to meditate 3, 4, 5, 6 times a day if I wanted to. And I really threw myself into practice and said, and discovered quite quickly that this is what's going to change everything, because it's not an experience. Breath-based meditation practice, mindfulness-based meditation practice is not experience dependent. You're not trying to achieve transcendent states. You're not propped up by some mantra or some idea of the divine. And not saying that that's bad necessarily. For me, it was like drugs, having the trappings of religious culture, having the trappings of various philosophies and ideas about divinity and transcendence and what have you. Just the starting point with Buddhism is just you, your breath, and your mind. Cultivate a relationship with that. Learn how to just be here. Learn how to walk this earth. Put 2 feet upon the earth before putting your head in the heavens. Be a simple human being. Become a decent human being before you attempt enlightenment, whatever that means. And from there, my life really transformed in a meaningful way. And from there, I developed a daily practice that became the root of my own inward revolution, that gave me a way to manage my emotions, that gave me a way to work with my body, and gave me a way to cultivate a relationship with myself that would then reflect within my relationships with everybody else in my life too. It's another big piece of depression and addiction is your relationships are really chaotic. And this gave me a method for understanding, well, my relationship to myself is my relationship to everything else. How you do anything is how you do everything. So, it was quite a profound revolution on all levels that I finally woke up. I finally found sanity, and I found a way to just be me, free from all of these other habits and tendencies and neuroses and what have you. And not that it's been 10 years since then, and not that it all went away either right away. But I can definitely say that although there are days, I have my bad days like anybody else, and there are days where it's like, I'm just a little stuck today. I'm a little bit stuck in the clouds, in the shadows today. I do have those days, but I definitely live free from depression now. I definitely live free from suicidality now. I definitely am lucky enough to be able to have a couple glasses of wine and put them down, put it down at the end of the night without that compulsion to constantly feed on something and without that fixate. And I have a life filled with purpose and meaning and a lot of passion and really wonderful people, really wonderful community, and really wonderful teachers and constant inspiration. And so...
Wow. Wow, that is such an incredible story, Ralph. And I'm so grateful that you shared it in such an open-hearted and honest way, because I think that so many people struggle in the way that you've struggled. And I myself have had a history of drugs and a problematic relationship with them. And so when you talk about this compulsion to escape, it really resonates with me. And absolutely, drugs were something that I was initially attracted to because I felt like I was accessing higher states of consciousness.
Yep.
Because I wasn't at home with my status quo consciousness. Because it was somehow, deeply melancholic. I had a lot, and I still do, suffer with anxiety on a variety of levels. And so that access to a feeling of almost invincibility and no kind of self-judgment that is, characteristic of maybe, everyday experience for me, it's very enticing. And so to hear you talk about this, this desire for escape and the confusion or the misunderstanding, at least for your path, that was the point, I think is so important to hear, because I really think, and I'd love for you to maybe extrapolate on this a little bit. I tend to feel like a lot of times the discourse around enlightenment or whatever that self-realization or that moment of awakening is, there's a kind of escapist discourse written into it, or there's this idea that when we access it, we're going to transcend the world. And to me, that seems a bit problematic, especially for people like us who are trying to transcend our own experience. I mean, we're trying to transcend for the wrong reasons. So do you have any thoughts on that, sort of in a more philosophical, from a more philosophical standpoint? What are we doing when we're externalizing enlightenment in this way? Right. And then off of that, what is enlightenment to you then?
Sure. So let me begin by saying that, the Hare Krishnas, they have a profound ancient tradition. They're an authentic lineage of a branch of Hinduism with their own particular philosophy that didn't work for me. Amma is still my heart teacher to this day. And like I said, the problem was me and my attitude towards meditation, towards spiritual experience, and towards this concept of enlightenment. And I love that you said externalizing, meaning that it's something outside of me that I have to then go and reach and cultivate. Which is necessarily alienating, which is necessarily disempowering, actually. It's saying I'm not enough on my own. I need to add to my situation in order to become enough, right? And then and at that point, enacting spiritual materialism really makes sense. Well, maybe if I get the right robes and the right mantra and the right beads and a Sanskrit name and surround myself with enough spiritual and high-minded people, well, then I'll become enough, and those are also external methods, right? Or maybe if I yoga away my depression, or if I just manage to put my anxiety in a drawer, or whatever, if I take enough trips to India, or whatever it is, and that all of that, while it can be fine, it can certainly be fine, all of that intrinsically says it's not something that's in me. It's something out there that I have to reach, and it's necessarily disempowering. The spiritual path is one of empowerment. Always, always, always. In fact, I recently began augmenting my language around meditation instruction because telling people what to do is really disempowering. Being told what to do is disempowering, and this should be a practice that is empowering. So I've learned to phrase my instructions now as invitations, as opportunities, as, ideas, really. So, I had a student recently asked me what enlightenment was, and really I had to come back and say, I don't know, because I haven't been there, and I speak from my experience always, as a rule. But I can say from a Buddhist perspective, philosophically, the words are not just transcend, they're transcend and include. You transcend and include your present experience. That samsara and nirvana are inseparable, and what dictates whether you experience samsara versus nirvana is really the level of attachment in your own mind. That these are not places; these are points of view.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a shift in perspective.
It's a shift in perspective, definitely. So
it's not as if leaving samsara is to leave the world behind. It's that your relationship with the world changes.
Exactly. I mean, that adage from Christianity certainly remains true, to be in the world but not of the world, to engage with the world and to do the laundry and the dishes and pay your taxes and have a zip code and a name and preferences and what have you. I was just doing yoga at a Bauhaus before you came over here, and to engage with the world, but in a different way and from a different perspective. They say an enlightened person sees both delusion and with clarity at the same time. I don't understand exactly how that works, but they're situated within both. And it's I imagine it's almost like a choice that you're constantly making, right? So for my money and for my context and where I'm at in my practice, I'll just say this, that it's all, the answers are all within the body and the mind. The Buddha said that the Dharma is in our bodies, and he referred to our six senses as glory fields, right? And the body and the mind are not separate, much like the brain and the mind aren't separate. The brain is just the body, right? So, and I love how, I believe it was Patabi Joyce who said, with regards to Ashtanga yoga, and I think certainly the same applies with deep meditation practice, that before practice, the philosophy is useless. After practice, the philosophy is obvious, right? So when we look deeply at mind, one of the opportunities that is there is to see firsthand for yourself that there is both the container of mind, which is spacious awareness, that the mind is really and truly vast, and then there's the stuff that happens within mind. So all of our sense perceptions, all of our thoughts, all of our feelings, all of our preferences, including, the sound of a tractor that's happening a block down that I can happen to hear. We live in Brooklyn where there's kind of feels like you're living in a construction zone much of the time. So, even ambient noises that are far off in the distance, it's like that is within the container of spacious awareness. Spacious awareness, the container of mind, which is the context for all of our experience to go on within. Much like a movie screen, that is the context that a movie is projected upon, right? The apparatus itself is actually stable, constantly present, constantly peaceful, very serene, very vivid and bright and vibrant, full of energy and full of peace all the time. That is the background of our experience that is absolutely 100% there. It is, again, the container within which all of our experience is happening. And so from that vantage point, the spiritual practice is not about cultivating some superpower that will, propel you like a jetpack off to this land called enlightenment. But the spiritual path is then cultivating the eyes to see that which is already there. And sometimes I think to myself that, well, we're cultivating calmness and fortitude and discipline and serenity and love and positive self-regard and positive regard for others. We're cultivating all of these things on purpose in meditation practice. But sometimes I think to myself, that's a trick. I think we're actually cultivating these things in meditation practice so that we'll be able to turn within and recognize, oh, that's what's already there. But if we don't know it in our conscious everyday experience, how are we going to notice it in the background of our experience? So sometimes I look at meditation from that perspective.
Yeah, I love that. I think when you described the kind of container of our experience, there was a way that you described it that I thought was really resonant for me, and yeah, that was really powerful. So now I want to ask you about I feel like this is a good segue into this discussion, since we're sort of moving into what meditation is. I was listening to one of your workshops the other day, and I really liked what you talked about. You talked about some of the complaints about meditation, and also a misunderstanding of meditation, or at least a perspective that you take on meditation, which is against the idea that thoughts are bad.
Mm-hmm.
So I want you to kind of maybe unpack that a little bit. What is this, mythology about meditation and thoughts being bad, and I have to purge myself of thoughts? What is that? And what from your perspective, should we be focusing on more? What would be more of a helpful way of approaching meditation rather than this kind of idea?
Right. So the number one complaint with meditation is that my mind is busy. I can't get to it. I'm too scattered. It's a mess in there. I can't even believe it. Like, how am I supposed to sit down with this? One of the characters on that show, what is it, Garfunkel? Oh, I can't remember it right now. Garfunkel and Oates. Hilarious TV show. She says, meditation is like giving a bullhorn to all of the thoughts I was trying to crowd out with TV, right? Like, we sit down and we look inside, and it's like turning on a light in a dark room, and it's like, holy crap, it is a mess in there, and I don't want to deal with it. So one of the myths of meditation is, my brain is too busy for this. And isn't it about getting rid of all of that? Isn't it about emptying out your mind, achieving some blank slate consciousness? Like, it's about being Zen, just sitting and spacing out, right? Like, people think that that's what Zen means. And nothing could be different, actually. Thoughts are good. Let me just say something really revolutionary here. Thoughts are great. Our brain thinks 60 thought fragments per snap of a finger. That's a whole lot of thinking. Some of our neurons travel at 200 miles an hour, right? Our brains eat up 20% of our total calories, and it's only like 3 pounds of our entire body, right? There's a lot of electricity pumping through our brains. There's a lot going on with thoughts. We're not going to be able to stop that, one. We're not going to sit down and be able to just stop that process. And two, who would want to anyways? Thoughts are really interesting. Thoughts are there's a difference between thoughts and thinking. That we can establish that, that thinking is when we take control of our thoughts and we kind of steer the flow of this river of thoughts that's constantly going. But the river of thoughts is constantly going, right? And thinking is how you came to be doing this podcast. Thinking is how I came to have, the mindfulness sessions and have developed it to be what it is. Thinking is how good Dharma talks happen and how good meditation instruction happens, is we become thoughtful and reflective about what we're doing in the world. Thoughts are really good. They're our friends. So
You probably wouldn't be very interesting without them.
Right? What
Be able to engage in a conversation.
what a life that would be. I'm not signing up for the spiritual path to be a vegetable. There's plenty of time for that later in life, I suppose. It's a possibility. But so rather thoughts in meditation, so from a foundational perspective of meditation, the river of thoughts that we are constantly with offer us an opportunity to learn how to be skillful about this experience of having thoughts float through and then our tendency to engage with them and to engage in thinking rather than sitting with an intentional object of focus, such as the breath or a candle flame or a mantra or so on. Right? And that's what we find is that we sit down and we intend to pay attention to an object of focus, and our mind just slips off and we go back into the realm of thinking. And that is natural. That is natural, and that's okay. The opportunity of meditation is to work with that situation and to make friends with that situation over and over again and to train ourselves in kindness within that situation. So thoughts are there to help us strengthen, in foundational meditations where you're just focusing on an object. If we are to go to the realm of cultivating positivity in meditation, which would be the second family in Buddhist meditation, cultivating positivity, we can become aware of the content of our thoughts a little bit in that our thoughts are always about trying to get us happiness in some way, some happiness or some derivative of happiness, and trying to avoid suffering, anxiety, failure, some derivative of suffering. They're always going in that direction. If I'm thinking about the future, I'm thinking about all the things that I want and all the things that I hope I get right, and don't forget about to pick that up at the store because then I won't have it for tomorrow and I won't be able to be happy. If I'm thinking about the past, I'm thinking about what I could have done better in order to be happy or to suffer less, and so on. So, like loving kindness meditation cuts to the chase, cuts through all of those thoughts and says, because loving kindness meditation is a practice of wishing oneself and others happiness and freedom from suffering. And so we get to the root of all of what our thinking is about in loving kindness meditation, which is quite powerful. So, loving kindness meditation is going in the flow of where our thinking is anyways. We're just getting to the bottom of things. Mm-hmm. And then if we go into the third realm of meditation, the third family of meditation, which is eliminating negativity, so healing from trauma and distress, which we've all had traumas, either with a lowercase t or a capital T, and cultivating compassion, right, at which the two go hand in hand. It is through healing from our traumas that compassion is cultivated. It is through facing our own darknesses that we learn how to have true empathy and a desire to conjoin with others in their path of healing. So in that family of meditation, what I see in my experience being a psychotherapist and having taught meditation for a number of years, and from just my own personal experience with myself and developing, is that the more trauma, unresolved stuff we're holding, the more shadow material we're holding, the more we have not met with our what Rogerian therapy calls our unfinished business, Gestalt therapy calls our unfinished business. The more unfinished business we have, the more restless the mind, the more anxious we are. Right? The more difficult sitting down and doing foundational meditation practices is going to be, because the mind is incredibly unwieldy, because we're trying to come to center, and it's as if lying at that center is an open wound. And it's like touching an open wound. It's like your finger's going to pull away immediately in an autonomic reaction because it hurts. So in this way, having an incredibly busy mind is like the psyche's disaster signal to us. Hey, there's something here that needs to be worked out. There's something here for you to look into, to go deeper with. And so if that's your experience in meditation, well, those thoughts are not your enemy. They're trying to tell you something, And certainly in my own experience, the more we turn towards our traumas and our pains and our sufferings and our anxieties and woes and work with them to the point that they become healed, meditation becomes so much more peaceful and so much more restful and so much more interesting and enjoyable and subtle and deep. So those, even in that situation where somebody is too anxious to sit down for 5 minutes and not move with their eyes closed, that experience is really pointing the way to something else, right? So thoughts are our friends.
Thoughts are our friends. I wish I had known you back in my academic days when I was very, very turned off by meditation when I was still sort of on the academic path, because everything was about thinking. And actually, I mean, looking back, the abstracted thinking that I was very attracted to was a form of escape in the same way that, we were talking about drugs were earlier. But I was, I didn't want to be silent. I didn't want to, release my thoughts. And so I feel like actually, if I had found a teacher like you who was talking about meditation in this way, I think I could have got my foot in the door much earlier. Yeah. So that's really great.
Nice.
So moving on from that, or in that same direction, then I know you had talked about before we started that you don't love a 5 to 7 minute meditation just because you think it's more, to have a longer meditation might be more fruitful. But is there something that you might want to offer as maybe a short meditation or a technique that you want to offer the listeners?
Yes, of course. For a 5 to 7 minute meditation experience, I actually wouldn't offer foundational breath-based meditation practice, just because I think that for listeners who may be new to meditation, there's a lot. My approach is really body-based at this point in my practice, and spending a lot of time relaxing the body before coming into any focus with the breath. So that takes a little while. But from going to the brain-based perspective and the second family of meditation, I think I can offer something within the 5 to 7 minute range that is around rewiring the brain with desirable mental states, if that sounds good.
Yeah, that sounds great. Okay. Actually, before we go into that, I would love to hear you talk just a little bit more about, because I feel like in a lot of instances you hear breath-based meditation is offered as the most basic form of meditation, but what I hear you saying is that this is actually very challenging for beginners. Do you have any thoughts on why that is?
Yes, lots of thoughts, sure. So, I mean, I just got done teaching upstate at a retreat over the weekend where two of the people at the retreat were going off, and actually one of them was crying as she said this. She was like, I was ready to give up on meditation because I found it so frustrating, because I just didn't get it. I didn't get how, just sitting and focusing on my breath was supposed to do anything for me. And there's a misconception that we always have to start there. And that's the, well, I'll just say that there's a lot of other places to start. And I think that in many ways, focusing on the breath and returning from distraction, while that is the core of my daily practice, a very fruitful practice, is the practice that has been most studied by neuroscience and shown to produce these positive results. I don't always think that that's the most appropriate path, especially for the beginner, right? One of my teachers, Dr. Miles Neal, says that, thank God, meditation is not a one-size-fits-all practice. There are many different ways to practice, and you can find one that works for you. I think that the body, that working with our body is definitely underestimated in the mainstream mindfulness tradition. That the Buddha talked about mindfulness of body, and yes, there are body scan practices in the mindfulness-based tradition, but I have been listening to a lot of recordings online of this gentleman, Reggie Ray, who, similar to me, is in the tradition of Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. I consider myself a Shambhala Buddhist practitioner these days, in addition to everything else. But he really recommends spending quite a long time working with the body, putting one's awareness in various regions of the body in order to dissolve tension, dissolve held pressures and held traumas and what have you. And we practice meditation quite a bit lying down, so that we can be close to the earth and plug into the earth and to feel what it is to ground oneself, feel what it is to truly relax, to have an active sense of relaxation, and to learn on a somatic level what it is to let go before you sit up and before you start working with the breath and any sort of object of focus. That to me is incredibly important and often missed, or at least, you might go to a meditation class and they might say, scan through your body head to toe, relax your belly, relax your face. And it's kind of quick. And in my experience, spending much more time with the body is often very, very appropriate for even intermediate practitioners in order to have a really relaxed sense of stepping to focus. We don't tend to think that relaxation and focus go together, but actually relaxation is the basis for having any sort of stability of consciousness. We think of focusing as being like a caffeinated state, like hyper-focused, and that's one way to do it. But in meditation, actually, the more we can relax, the more the mind has an opportunity to settle, and the more vivid and vibrant our experience will become, because there's less going on. Mm-hmm. There's less dulling the mind when there's less going on. And so our experience of the breath, or whatever the object of meditation is, then becomes very vibrant and very interesting and very soothing, and something that you want to gravitate your attention towards, rather than something that you're struggling to find. Where is it? I don't feel it very much. I'm losing it every 3 seconds. This is really frustrating. To have more of a sense of graciousness, we have to start with a somatic, body-based sense of relaxation.
Oh, that's really great. And I feel like what was really great about what you said is that I feel like you've dispelled two myths, essentially. One being, we haven't really talked about this directly, but the traditional meditative seat. Sure. You're talking about lying on your back as being another meditative seat. And I feel like there are some people who might be happy to hear that they don't have to sit cross-legged. It's really challenging for some people. And then also the body-based, the somatic-based practice of meditation. I think you're right. It's really not something that you hear about so much, and will be a welcome, I think, for a lot of people. And for me personally, I've found that in my own meditation, as of late, I have much more fruitful meditations when I'm focusing on a particular sensation that I happen to have in my chest. I mean, mm-hmm. It's very much almost like a heart chakra centered experience for me. And even though you could consider that region associated with the breath, there's something about shifting the focus not so much on the breath in my lungs, which I could do, but really just the sensations that are arising in that area has been really interesting.
Yeah.
So then, just to get back to where you were going before I interrupted you, you had wanted to share a technique?
Sure. So this we'll do, I hesitate to call it a brain rewiring technique, but that's what it is. It's a brain rewiring technique. This is one method of taking desirable mental states and embedding them in what's called implicit memory, which I translate as your gut level reaction to the world, or your world view. Rewiring our brains on this implicit memory level with a positive experience. I hesitate to call it a brain rewiring because you will leave behind neural traces of physical structure in the brain with this experience. However, this needs to be practiced repetitiously. We are products of what we repeat. So this is a technique that I find quite useful, that I myself intend to, though I don't always, practice about 12 times a day. It doesn't take terribly long. If you can do this, what I'm about to show you, in 15 seconds, that is wonderful. But I'll take a little bit longer to show this to you now so that we set up and go into it properly, and then I give you lots of ideas about how to practice this. So just come to a nice comfortable position, whether that means sitting upright in a chair or sitting cross-legged on the floor, or lying down on your back, which is actually a traditional meditation posture taught by the Buddha. And if you're lying on your back, place your feet flat on the floor with your knees bent and your hands over your belly. And if you're sitting in a chair, feet flat on the floor. And wherever you're sitting, place your hands somewhere where you won't fidget with them. I prefer mine facing downwards on either side of my lap. And just reaching the crown of the head towards the sky. And begin by allowing your legs and your seat and your feet to feel really heavy. Let them soften. The whole region of the pelvis and the hips and the thighs, the knees, all the way down to the toes, just soften. And here's a really delightful way to do a body scan. So begin by imagining that the sun is shining on your face. That perhaps you're in a natural environment or standing on a mountaintop and the sun is shining on your face. And you can feel the warmth on your cheeks, on your chin, on your forehead. The colors along the backs of your eyelids are beginning to brighten. And maybe even you turn your chin up to receive just a little bit more of that warmth, that crisp, nourishing light, right? And you give yourself over to the imagination of this actually happening. Your brain will not know the difference between this actually happening and you imagining it. So, feeling the warmth and the light of the sun on your face, begin to allow that energy to sink down into the skull, into the head. Let it sink down through your throat, your neck, your shoulder tops, your collarbones, your shoulder blades, on down through the arms and hands, on down through the chest, the belly, along the back, along the side body, all the way down through the pelvis and the hips and the legs, down through your heels and your toes and the soles of your feet, down into the earth. And just sensing any shift in awareness that has taken place as a result of this simple exercise. Please take now this good feeling that you're having, even if it's just very subtle, and I'll ask you to begin to amplify it on purpose in your mind. So, if it's a color, it gets brighter. If it's a sound, it gets louder. If it's a taste, it becomes sweeter. On purpose, magnify it. And then on purpose, magnify it again, intensify it. Notice how fresh it is. This feeling was not there before. It's here now. How nice to have this subtle, good feeling of the sun in your body. Intensify it one more time, double it. And as it grows larger and sweeter and louder and brighter and more vivid, I invite you to open up your body. Open up your face, your chest, your belly, your feet, and let it in. Let it sink deeply into you. Let it wash over you so that you marinate in the good feeling. And just enjoy it for a few seconds. And then put that feeling in the background of your mind. And let it just linger there. If it fades away, that's okay. And then place in the foreground of mind somebody that you love. Somebody that you really care for. Please see them as clearly as you can. If you are only capable of feeling their presence, that's okay, but make it as high definition as possible. See their face, their eyes, their hair, their cheekbones. Maybe whisper their name silently in your mind a couple of times. And really bring them into the room, sitting with you. Smelling their smell or hearing their voice is good, if that's available. And bringing them into the room to sit here with you, just look at them and dig on them. And see if you can begin to tap into that natural love you have for this person. Where would I be without you? How many good times have we shared? And as you begin to feel the sense of love uncovered in you, as you make space for it and allow it, as you dwell on this person, love flowing out towards this person, notice how sweet that feeling of love is. Notice how good it feels, and intensify it. Let it be big. Let it be bright. And I invite you to intensify it again, double it. Let it grow and grow. And then let all of that goodness intensify a third time. Maybe intensify to a ridiculous extent. Fake it till you make it. And then invite it in. Like the sun's rays shining upon your skin when you're laying out at the beach. Like a flood of waters washing over you. Feel this good feeling spreading everywhere through your body. It's sinking into your skin. It's sinking into your muscles, into your bones, into your DNA. And just enjoy it. Give yourself over to it and enjoy it for 10 more seconds on your own. And then seal in this good work by taking one nice deep breath. And as you exhale, let out a sigh. And then transition very gently back. Maybe wiggling your fingers and toes, slowly peeling open the eyes. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Ralph. Gosh, I've got to get to your mindfulness session, man. That's amazing. Yeah, I really enjoyed the sun visualization, and also the invitation to intensify those good qualities. I feel like I haven't really experienced that cue before in a meditation, and it's powerful.
Nice.
Wow, thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
Yeah, so actually, this is a great segue just to tell the listeners where they can find you.
Sure.
Tell us about this mindfulness sessions, maybe any other projects you're involved in that you want to share.
Absolutely. So, just to wrap up that last one, I'll mention that that meditation comes from Rick Hansen. None of that did I think of on my own, although I definitely play with the language. But Dr. Rick Hansen is a neuropsychologist in Northern California who I'll talk about one of his books in a little bit. But in terms of my projects, the mindfulness sessions is coming back from a 2-month break and will begin this Saturday, October 3rd. at Loom Yoga in Bushwick. Every Saturday at 6 p.m. We will be there through the year. So, and my classes are always by donation with a suggested donation. But if you have no money, please just come. Don't worry about it. This stuff is meant to be freely offered. I'm hosting workshops at Maha Rose up here in Greenpoint on a regular basis. My next one is October 11th on healing anger.
Can you tell us where Maha Rose is?
Maha Rose is on Green Street between Manhattan and Franklin, right here in Greenpoint, in Brooklyn. Wonderful healing center with lots of stuff going on. I'll be doing something on healing trauma there early in the new year in 2016, so look out for that. All of this can be found on my website, which is ralphdelarosa.com. The Mindfulness Sessions is on Facebook. It's on Instagram. Also in January, I'm very excited to launch for the first time ever something called Life School. And Life School is going to be a 6-month curriculum of systematic trainings through the 3 families of meditation that I mentioned before. So we'll do 2 months of foundational meditation. We're going to spend a lot of time lying on the ground and really getting in touch with our bodies, and then learning to come into an object of focus very, very skillfully so that we can actually do it. So we'll spend 2 months on that. We'll spend 2 months on this positive brain rewiring material that comes from Rick Hanson, also loving kindness meditation, which is a traditional form of meditation practice in the Buddhist canon. Something that's being taught to veterans right now to help them heal from trauma, something that's being taught to drug addicts, to people with depression. It's been adapted all over the place for clinical intervention. So we'll be exploring that in the second family of meditation. And then the third segment will spend 2 months on healing traumas and cultivating compassion. And the whole thing is going to be open to the public. And you can either drop into individual classes, or you can sign up for a $40 membership, and the $40 membership per month gets you not only all of the classes, all of the workshops, but recordings of all of the classes, printed materials, recommended readings. There will also be a once a month process group where just we sit around and we circle up and just talk about how this is going, what it's like to switch to having a dedicated practice and doing these things systematically, what's coming up in the meditation practice. So I really want to offer a way for people to access a really deep training that's super user-friendly, that's not expensive, that's quite affordable, where the only real expectation is that you're going to engage in it earnestly. That's it. No other beliefs or anything like that to sign up for. Just engage and work it out for yourself, what it looks like and what you really think about it. But the idea is to see the fruits of meditation for yourself. And then I'll just mention that the last 2 months of that on healing trauma, because that work can be a little bit intensive, and I really want to offer a very safe and loving container for that work that won't be open to the public. That will be a members-only experience. So if you want to sign up just for that, that's totally fine. But you got to be in for the whole ride, start to finish. So that way we're working with a secure and grounded group that's committed to doing it together. So
where's that going to be held?
That will be at Loom. That will actually take the place, of the mindfulness sessions starting in January. Because this is kind of our beta test year to really try out offering this systematic training. But I'm thoroughly excited about it.
It's such an incredible offering. Yeah. That's great.
Thank you.
A lot of really exciting things going on.
Yeah.
Awesome. So,
thank you.
So we've covered all the questions I have for you. My last question, which is something that I ask all of the people that I interview, and I'll just give a little backstory to this. So one of the offerings that I'm giving on the Five Tapas website is an annotated bibliography of yoga philosophy and wisdom books that, a complete sort of list, including summaries of each book, that I wish I had when, I was looking for more material. So if you want to offer 2 or 3 books that you think have been really transformative that could be included in that resource,
Sure.
that would be really great.
Sure. I would definitely recommend A Path with Heart by Jack Kornfield. Very, very thorough. Yes, wonderful. Huge inspiration in my practice and in my life. A Path with Heart covers a lot of ground, really tells a very thorough story of the path of meditation, and offers lots of guided practices along the way for cultivating daily practice. A basic foundational meditation manual that I refer back to again and again is Turning the Mind into an Ally by a gentleman named Sakyong Mipam Rinpoche. If you just Google Turning the Mind into an Ally, it will come
You'll find it
right up.
We'll put that in the show notes.
Sure.
So you can spell it.
Anything by Reggie Ray.
Reggie Ray.
Who dharmaocean.org. You can find lots of guided meditation practices and lots of free resources on his website. Wonderful, deep, and different view of meditation there, for sure. And then I'll also mention something that is not within the canon of Buddhism or yoga, but has definitely changed my life in the past year, which is the work of this man, Bill Ferguson. And he has an e-course called Mastery of Life. Mm-hmm. I have done 4 chapters out of 10, and it has radically changed so much. It really informs my understanding of how to heal from trauma in a self-directed way. Really, really wonderful training. He's, again, not a Buddhist, not a yogi. He's actually a divorce lawyer who talks like Mr. Rogers, looks a little bit like a basset hound, and is just this very sweet man who paid attention to conflict in relationships and people who love each other breaking up over and over again. And he had this wonderful wealth of insights about the way the stuff that hurts us really runs our lives and shapes our lives, and how to heal from it in a very direct and no-nonsense sort of way. It's tough work, but it works.
So
Bill Ferguson, masteryoflife.com. Huge inspiration.
Wow, this has been such an incredible conversation, Ralph. Thank you so much for
Thank you as well.
Time to talk to me and to share so much about your life and what you're doing. It really, I think there's so much here that's been really illuminating and insightful that people are going to really get a lot from. So thank you.
It's truly been a pleasure. Like I said, all the benefit, I feel like I'm receiving it, but may the benefits of this conversation, may it spread out like the most profound ripple effect ever and nourish sentient beings everywhere.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much, Ralph.
Thank you.
I'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that interview with Ralph De La Rosa. You can find out more about Ralph at ralphdelarosa.com. You can also follow the mindfulness sessions on Facebook and Instagram.